Hi, and welcome to In the Garden, a live program developed by Montgomery County Master Gardeners with the University of Maryland. I am Melissa Siegel, your moderator for today. Our experts are Kat Kahn and Steve Dubik. Steve? Steve? Okay. Well, why don't we get going ahead? University of Maryland Extension, Montgomery County Master Gardeners. We provide services. We provide a speakers group, demo gardens, therapeutic horticulture, youth gardening, one-time events, and Ask a Master Gardener. Today, Kat Kahn will tell us about Harvest Share, a new program for us. During the program, we will post a link to our website. Please remember to include your email in case we need to follow up. You can also view previously answered questions from In the Garden on YouTube. So let's get started. Our first question, do you recommend bone meal for tulips? And Kat, can you answer that?
Yeah, actually, bone meal for tulips, people use it mostly because we think it's part of the tradition of planting bulbs in the fall. But in recent years, it's more of seen as more of a garden myth. You don't have to throw that bone meal in when you plant. The purpose of the bone meal was really to add both calcium and phosphorus to those bulbs to get them a good start. But unless you have a documented deficiency, that you can really only determine through a soil test, it really is unnecessary. Most gardens are going to have plenty of both of that nutrient in the soil already. So don't spend your money. In terms of fertilizer and things too, you probably do better with a little bit of compost. Though in the spring, when your bulbs come up, it is okay to add a little bit of dilute fertilizer when you start to see that emergence of the stem and in the spring. The other thing we can talk about with bulbs is I know some of you probably, like me, get busy with other things in the early fall, and it really isn't too late to plant. Especially with our warming winters, go ahead and put those bulbs in. Check on the individual bulbs to see what depth they should be planted. It's usually on the container itself, but generally 5 to 6 inches in the soil. An easy way to do it is trench out your area if you're going to make rows of bulbs. Another interesting suggestion, if you're planning on doing designs with your bulbs, make sure you start with kind of even amounts, but save a few of those bulbs and start them in pots, because unfortunately what we plant is not necessarily what comes up. We could have the bulb that just isn't going to produce. We could have your friendly neighborhood squirrel come in and decide that he's going to take 2 of the 5 in that beautiful pattern you laid out, and then you don't have your nice planned bed. The other thing when talking about problems with these bulbs is and critters is that you can do some things to deter them digging up the bulbs, and then also when they emerge in the spring. So in the fall, you can add a little bit of grit or even eggshells, something that's sharp, that would keep the critters out. They don't like digging in that. Or you can even kind of line your trench with some mesh to keep them out as well. And then when you start seeing, the growth in the spring, go ahead and squirt them a little bit with some kind of, noxious substance that'll keep them away. The other interesting thing you could do is mix them with daffodils, because they really don't like daffodils. The deer don't. So they love tulips, but if they're planted amongst daffodils, they'll generally leave them alone. So hopefully that answers that question.
Great. Thank you so much, Kat. Our next question was submitted by Monica, and she asks, what are your recommendations for easy to keep ferns for a shady front yard? And we've come up with 4 wood ferns, which were many, many types of them: autumn fern, Christmas fern, and sensitive fern. So those are good ferns for you to plant. The next question, let's see. Would like advice on whether the following list of shrubs are good choices in my neighborhood of Silver Spring to attract birds. Are there better substitutes for a partially shaded yard? And that question is for Steve. Steve?
All right, Melissa, I think I froze up there a little bit, but I'll try to answer that. I'm sorry. So I'm in a place where I'm not having the greatest reception today, but okay. So if you're trying to grow recommendation for shrubs, native shrubs for shady areas that birds like, there's a few. One of probably the best one is one of our native viburnums, arrowwood, Viburnum dentatum. And that's really helpful to some of the migratory songbirds that come through here. And we have several shrub types of dogwoods too. Of course, we have our native dogwood, Cornus florida, but that's a small tree. But for shrubs, we have a silky dogwood, the gray dogwood, and we also have a
Okay. Well, so Steve? Okay, we'll wait till he comes back and we'll go on to the 4th question. It's also submitted by Monica. And she asks, my indoor herb garden has some tiny black... Oh, there you go. Okay, Steve.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. Go on.
So we have bayberry, which would be a great plant for cedar waxwings. And there's a few others, but those would be a really good choice. So I think the client might have had some thoughts about some plants that they mentioned, but some of those were regarded by some to be invasive. You can go to the Maryland Department of Agriculture website, and they have a listing of plant materials on the status called Tier 1 and Tier 2 that you should probably avoid. And 2 of those are common shrubs that sometimes...
Okay. Well, let's get to the next question. I started, my indoor herb garden has some tiny black flies. Should I worry? Kat, can you address that?
Don't worry. We'll get you on the right path with your little flies. They're probably fungus gnats, which really are harmless. They're annoying, and you think all of a sudden that you have some big infestation, but they really aren't going to harm your indoor plants. They like really moist areas, so they may actually have larvae and in the moist soil. They also can live in drains, like your sink drain if you've got plants in the kitchen. So you want to make sure you keep that clean. But maybe something to talk about is not just these little flies, but the conditions at which maybe flies and other diseases may affect an indoor herb garden. In one of the other pictures, we had a basil with a little caterpillar, and also sage that looked like it had powdery mildew. And the powdery mildew thrives on that moist, on that really moist air. And so when we're thinking about indoor herb gardens, we really need to think about what the plant in general needs. The conditions for growing inside are far different than, or different issues than outside. We want to look at light, the humidity, the moisture in the potting mix and temperature. And you can't group herbs into one consideration, because there's some that like the soil more dry. There's some that never like to be dried out. So basil likes a lot more sun than maybe some of your, oregano. Your rosemary can get dried out by if you put it too close to the, the air vent when you have your heat come on. So you really need to look at those, very specifically. And one of the other questions about these plants were, that if you have grow lights to help them. But something that people don't think about with grow lights is, an hour of outdoor full sun is not an hour replaced by an hour of red or blue lights. That they actually say for every hour of required sunlight, you need to expose the plants to 2 hours of fluorescent light. So if you have a plant that requires 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight, you are talking about a lot of time under those grow lights just to really, for those plants to thrive. Good drainage is also essential in the house. Even though a plant may require a lot more water, you still don't want that sitting in water getting soggy. You'll get the funguses, you can get the flies, and like I said, that make sure that there isn't a heat source or a constant source of a drying source that's going to affect the humidity around those plants. And in terms of fertilizing or feeding, an occasional dilute fertilizer is fine, but if you don't do it, the plant's probably going to be okay.
Great. Thank you so much, Kat. Our next question is from Monica again. She's great. And her question is it okay to trim this plant in the fall? I don't know what this plant is, but it's getting tall. Steve, are you here? Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and take this for him. This plant is called Mahonia. There are many different varieties, and this one is a taller, thinner variety. And what they recommend for pruning this plant is after they flower. But if you cut off where the flowers were, you're not going to get the beautiful blueberries that we have during the summer. So make sure that you trim the right pieces or places, and you don't want to do it before it gets too tall. I think that's what it's called. Oregon grape holly, and the berries that come in the summertime are fabulous food for the birds. So you really don't want to disrupt that process. Okay, let's see. Question number 6 is a question that I asked because I have these 10 skip laurels that I planted to make a hedge 10 years ago. You see the pictures? The leaves are showing signs of something eating them, and what is that? What I came up with was laurels are affected by a disease caused by bacterial pathogens, Xanthomonas pruni. And it typically starts in early summer with little brown sores appearing on the undersides of leaves. The spots grow and develop red borders with a yellow, orangey halo. The spots eventually fall out of the leaves, leaving behind gaping holes and tattered leaf tissue like you see here. Many infected leaves look as though someone peppered them with buckshot. And there's another disease called cherry shot hole disease. In both of those, it's very similar. Both of those, chemical control is hard to achieve for home growers. So they're going to go away once the summer is over, and the plant will heal itself. And so you don't really need to worry about it. Okay, plant number 7, houseplants. This is my favorite. Kat, do you want to take this question? It's my friend gave me this house plant when she moved. What is it, and how do I take care of it over the winter? Does it need a lot of water and sunlight, and what pests should I watch out for?
Well, it is a beautiful house plant, and we do know that it is a begonia, and begonias are interesting. They are grown not only for their flowers, But there are certain species that really are just grown for their foliage. And this one looks to be that type, though it's hard to tell, but does have a very beautiful leaf. We grow them as houseplants in the States, but they're actually native to subtropical and tropical climates. There are over 1,800 different plant species. So like I said, from the picture, it's hard to tell exactly what this was, but they don't like cold temperatures. So these aren't a plant. We may have them outside, but really grow them as an annual. But if this one has been grown as a house plant, it looks very healthy. So you either have a gardener for a neighbor, or she just got her plant. It looks good. So this is if it was grown for the flower, it's just a very I'm sorry. They can be grown for their beautiful flowers, but if this is a more for foliage, they have different habitats, or they have different growth habits. You can get a large bush, you can get a trailing. You still might get a few blooms in there, or even flowers that are hidden in that beautiful foliage. So in terms of taking care of it, they do like a bright spot with at least some direct sunlight. Early morning sun, in an east window works well. Winter sun, several hours of even the winter sun are good for them. And they do like the soil to stay evenly moist. So if you let it dry out just only slightly between waterings, and reduce the watering in the winter. But like we just talked about with the indoor herb garden, we don't want soggy, moist soil that will promote bacterial or fungal growth, or attract little flies. And you can fertilize just like you would a regular indoor houseplant, but you don't. It's not really necessary. They can get very leggy, especially with the inconsistent sun. You can pinch back the branches to keep them nice and full, and you can actually pull them outside in the summer once we have warm temperatures, and they do require a little bit of shade. Can't take the 8 hours of that direct July heat we have here. So keep up the good work with that plant, because your neighbor did and gave you a beautiful indoor plant.
Thank you so much. I want to remind you all that you can ask your questions by typing them in the comments section during the show until the end today. And please include your email in case we need to follow up with you. Steve, are you there?
I'm here. I'll give it a try.
Question number 8. Let's see, the question is twofold, and I'll give you the first one.
Okay.
Help. My pine tree is dying. Its needles are turning brown and dropping. I moved into my house this summer. All of a sudden, my pine needles are turning brown and dropping. What is wrong with the tree? Is there anything I can do to save it? Steve? There you go. I guess not. Okay.
Now he's
All right. I think I'm back.
Steve, okay.
Okay, so there, the common causes for pines dying in our area, they usually get stressed. As a result of giving stress, they give off a chemical. This chemical attracts certain types of insects. There's boring insects, and there's a group of boring insects called bark beetles. And the bark beetles will generally tunnel underneath the bark of your conifer, and sometimes they bring a fungus with it on their body. Sometimes they bring a nematode. But basically what's going to happen is they're disrupting the vascular system underneath the bark. And what does that mean?
Okay. Let's see if he comes back. Okay, and also number 9 is with him. So we'll
It's
wait.
being shorter.
There you go. Okay.
So hopefully I'm back again. So you might have to manage for those, but that's difficult to do. So you may have to call in a professional arborist to manage for bark beetles, but that's one issue. There are many other issues, but bark beetles are real common. The evidence of that, you would see small exit holes about the size of them if you were on a dartboard. One or two isn't going to cause an issue, but if you have several, if you do have that on a tree and you have other pines or other conifers nearby, you want to remove that because they will leave that pine tree or that conifer and go to the next one or close one nearby. So sanitation is a really good form of management for bark beetles. You may need to get some help calling a professional arborist, and they may make an evaluation, possibly to use an insecticide. But if they do, it's probably just going to apply just to the bark, or it'll be applied systemically because that's where there are. You don't have to spray the foliage or anything.
Okay. And the second question she had was, my oaks and maples are losing their leaves early. What is going on? Steve? Okay, there you go. Are you here?
I'm back. I'm not sure how much you lost. So
okay.
Hopefully, if you see the yellowing inside, that's just an indication of that you're having normal leaf drop or needle drop. And the plant will hopefully be fine and outgrow that. But some years it appears more dramatic than others.
Okay, and I also had a second question from the same person. My oaks and maples are losing their leaves early. What is going on? Okay,
so you may be getting some leaf spot from time to time, and particularly late in the year, and that might cause the leaves to drop off. It's been a relatively wet year. But we're having a larger problem with our oaks, particularly white oaks, and that's confounding them. It's been happening, the impacts over several years, many years. Our climate is changing, and it's becoming more.
Okay. Let's see if he comes back. All right. Well, let's go to question 12. And Kat, this is something that you know about. Is it necessary to rake the leaves, or can I?
There's sort of a natural decline. So.
Okay. Is it necessary to rake the leaves, or can I leave them down all winter? We talked about this one for a while. I mow them and put the cut up leaves on my beds. Best to keep leaves off your lawn, they say, but okay to leave in the beds? Oak leaves take a long time to decompose, so should I mow them now?
Well, this is up for debate. It is tradition to get out there and break your back raking leaves into big mounds, or put them in the, put them in your paper sacks, and or let the street sweepers come get them. But actually, the trend now is to leave them down. But what you do need to do is make sure that you're mulching those leaves, that the leaves, and you may need to raise the blade on the mower and go over them several times. Because if you're going to leave them on the lawn, they should be really dime-sized or smaller, and that might take several passes with a mower. If you leave the leaves on the lawn untouched, and they get wet and you have a lot of leaf litter, you are going to basically smother your lawn. There's no way for it to get sunlight. There's no way for it to air to circulate. So if you're going to leave that on, really mulch it up. You can put regular whole leaves, as long as they're not leaves that have difficulty decomposing, like the oak and sycamore. Use those as mulch on your beds. You can also, mulch those up small and put them on the beds. There is a new thought on mulching and using a mulch mower and breaking up those leaves. And that is that, should we be just leaving them be? Are we destroying habitat for, for bees or, other invertebrate species that might leave eggs or chrysalis on there. So I guess if I had to have a personal recommendation is keep that pile over in the corner of your yard that you can preserve, for the insects or the invertebrates to have their little home, mulch the rest of them, and save your money on the paper bags and save your back.
Great. Thank you so much. Steve, are you back?
I'm back. Yeah, I hope so.
Okay. Well, all we can do is this is a new world. So we have a question, foliage problems on a sugar maple. And the person who sent these in, Leanne, asked what's causing brown spots to form on my sugar maple. Is there any treatment that will help the bush tree when they put out new foliage in the spring? Both are planted in a mostly sunny side, and it's usually very moist. The button bush is about 5 years old, and the sugar maple was planted last fall.
Okay, so I think that
Okay. Let's see. I'll go to another one till he comes back. Somebody sent in a question through another program that we have, Plant Clinic, Ask a Master Gardener, which is online as well. And they asked about how to overwinter elephant ear, number 10. And I like these a lot. And they're wonderful during the late spring, early summer, and fall. What you do is you cut off the leaves, you wrap the corm in newspaper and put it in a cool place. If it's in a pot, you might overwinter the pot in the corm in the pot, but you got to keep it fairly dry and watch for signs of rot. Let's see. Rest of these are for Steve. So let's see if Bev has any questions from the Facebook
Yes, I do have one.
comment section.
I do have one question. Speaking of leaves, my large beech tree
Great.
has its leaves turning brown on the tips all summer. Should I worry?
Steve? I'm not familiar with that, so I couldn't answer that. And what about Kat?
No, I couldn't really. I don't have much experience with beets.
Steve?
yeah, okay, I think I'm there.
Okay.
So I heard about the beech tree.
Okay.
It could be an indication you may have a borer. There's some kind of root issue, but basically something's blocking the water and nutrient flow up your plant. So look on the trunk of your tree to see if you see any exit holes, possibly from borers or cankers, any kind of wounds or injuries or things like that. It's certainly been a relatively, for the most part, a moist year. So it should have been sufficient moisture for the beech tree. If there's been any disturbance to the root system, like if somebody's been planting trees and they dug a trench or any kind of construction, that could be a factor. It could have injured the roots. But if it is borers, then you probably want to reach out to professional arborists to help you manage that. Try to get an indication maybe what kind of borers you're dealing with. There are a few that get onto beech. Looking at the exit hole, maybe the time of the year might help to narrow it down, but I would reach out if it is a borer to seek out a professional arborist to help you manage with that. Yeah, generally you get browning at the tips, that something's blocking the water and nutrient flow. Another thing sometimes happens, people raise the soil level around beech trees because they have surface roots. They don't like the surface roots at times because it makes it difficult to maybe mow underneath of them. Mm-hmm. So that could be an issue. So if you raise the soil level, that's not going to be a good thing in the long term for a beech tree. The injury doesn't necessarily show up the first year. It takes a couple of years for it to see the full effect of if you raise the soil level around underneath of the tree.
Okay, I have two questions for you. One is it too late to reseed my lawn?
Okay. We are getting towards really the tail end of doing that. Probably around October 15th is generally it's kind of subjective tagline of when I think you should probably, put seed down. I think you can go later, but two things happens. One is that the turf may not be as well established for next year. So you come in, it's not as strong, it's not as vigorous, it's more open, and then you get more issues with weeds invading, like crabgrass and maybe later goose.
Okay. The next question was, over the last couple of years, I've planted several camellias, cherries, and other cold-sensitive plants. They weathered the winter well for the last couple of years. However, the long-term weather forecast...
Pre-emergence can impact your grass.
Okay. How about this one? Overwintering trees and shrubs. Let's see. Over the last couple of years, I planted several camellias, cherries, and other cold-sensitive plants. They weathered the winter well for the last couple of years. However, the long-term weather forecasts for this year are predicting a colder winter. Is there anything I should be doing to help my trees and shrubs overwinter?
There's a few things you can do. Hopefully a lot of the plant materials or the like camellias and things like that have been sold over the last, I say, several years or many years are hopefully better suited for our climate here. There's been some winters in the past when they got extremely cold. At that point in the middle of winter, there's probably little what you can do, but you could apply a mulch layer underneath there. And it does get a little bit dry sometimes in the winter. So that might conserve some of the moisture. So as the winds, if it gets to be kind of a harsh winter or very windy, where it's pulling out water from the leaves faster than it can be replaced, hopefully that would help. Sometimes people put barriers and burlap and things like that around plant materials. For the most part, I think you don't really need to do that with the plant materials that you mentioned. One of the things you probably don't want to do, be it a little earlier, like say September and August, is to fertilize the tree at that time. But at this point, fall fertilization is fine. But if you do it earlier in September and the end of August, it may actually stimulate the plant wanting to grow more or stay active longer, and it can impact cold hardiness.
Okay. Another question somebody had, and I tried to answer it, but I think that you could do a great job too. Monica asks, is it okay to trim this plant in the fall? It's question number 5. She didn't know what the plant was, but it's getting tall, and that was the Mahonia.
Okay, so yeah, there's a couple kinds of Mahonias we have around here. They're in the barberry family. They're a little bit problematic. Sometimes they're invasive. The Oregon grape holly, which is native to the Pacific Northwest, that doesn't seem to be quite as bad as its cousin, which is native to Asia, which is the leatherleaf Mahonia, which is the one in the picture. And so if you wanted to prune that plant, I would wait till the coldest part of winter's gone. Then you can kind of get a maybe mid-March and maybe remove some of the longer, lankier shoots. If you wanted to cut all the way back close to the ground, you could. They do flower in February and March, and they do attract a lot of pollinators. And some honeybees, some of them aren't even native pollinators when warm. Actually, it can be in winter, actually. They'll sometimes flower at the end of February. So they do provide an ecological service. Birds do eat it, the fruit, but they also disseminate the fruit. And part of the reason why they're becoming a little more problematic is plants in the barberry family are relatively deer resistant. With all the deer pressure we have, basically they're filling in a void. And so it's a broadleaf evergreen. It's fairly deer resistant, but if I had to choose the two Mahonias, I'd probably go to it's not really native here on the East Coast, but its counterpart, the Mahonia aquifolium. And the bonus with that one is that you get really good winter coloration. It colors up really nicely in the winter, then it regreens. But yeah, I would wait till the coldest part of winter's gone to prune it.
Great. Okay, so anything else? Bev, do you have any more questions?
No more questions. Thanks.
Okay, Steve, did you want to add anything today? Okay. Well, thank you all so much for coming to our program and asking such great questions. Today is our last program for the year. Please look for us in the spring, and if you still have questions over the next several months, you can go to the Montgomery County Library section of the Montgomery County, Maryland website, select events, and look for the online plant clinics. Thanks so much, Kat and Steve and everybody on the other side working on the Facebook program. We're really appreciative. Have a great winter.